In the heart of Umudin, a village surrounded by thick forests, a child was born. Her name is Adanna. Adanna was born under a full moon, just as the village drum began for the festival. Women danced around the fire. Men beat their drums with joy, and the air was filled with laughter. It was a night of celebration, but in one small hut, the mood was tense. Ugochi gripped the wounded bedpost, her body drenched in sweat. Her cries echoed through the hut. The midwife, an old wrinkled woman with white chalk on her face, whispered incantations as she guided the baby out into the world. And then silence. The baby came out strong and healthy, but there was no cry, no wail, not even a whimper. Everyone stared. Why is she not crying? Ugochi asked weakly. The midwife held the baby up, patted her back gently, then harder. Still, she didn't cry. She is breathing well, the old woman said slowly, but she refused to cry. The villagers came to see. Some said it was a bad sign. Others said it was a miracle. But the midwife only nodded and said, "This child carries a silence that is not ordinary." They named her Adanna, meaning father's daughter, in memory of her father, who had died months before she was born. As the years passed, the silence remained. Even when Adanna was hungry, she made no sound. When she fell and scraped her knees, she winced but never cried. When her mother scolded her, or when other children bullied her, she never showed sorrow. The villagers began to whisper behind her back, "This girl is not normal. Maybe she has no spirit." She's too quiet, too calm, like the eye of a storm. Some avoided her, others made signs of protection whenever she passed. The children called her the spirit girl. But Ugochi, her mother, loved her daughter deeply and protected her fiercely. "She's not cursed," she often said. "She's just different." Adanna grew into a striking young woman with full lips and soft glow on her face that made people look longer than they intended. Her hair was always braided neatly, and her steps were graceful. She moved like someone who belonged to another world. But inside her, Adanna felt like a storm locked in a bottle. She wanted to scream sometimes, to cry, to shout, but something inside her kept everything buried. Her emotions were heavy, yet her face remained calm. She had only one friend, Obinna, a playful young man who always tried to make her laugh. "You never cry, you never shout." How do you survive this crazy village? He would jokingly said. Adanna would smile friendly. Maybe my heart is made of stone. No, he would say softly. Your heart is just waiting for the right moment to speak. But Adanna was not sure what that moment would be, or if it would ever come. There were times when Adanna would sit alone by the stream, watching the water rush past the rocks. She liked the sound of the river, the only sound that felt like it understood her silence. Birds chirped in the trees, frogs croaked from the water's edge, but she remained silent, quiet, and thoughtful. The other girls in the village didn't include her in their laughter. They gossiped, plaited each other's hair, and talked about boys and marriage. But they left Adanna out. Some were afraid of her. Others just couldn't understand her silence. She's too strange, they would whisper. What man will marry a girl who has no tears? She hides something in her heart, something dangerous, one of the girls said. Even the elders began to speak cautiously about her. She is not a child anymore, said Chief Nwoke. What if her silence is a warning? What if the gods placed a spirit in her body that we cannot understand? But Ugochi never stopped defending her daughter. She is just different. Isn't there space in this world for people who don't cry? Still, the fear around Adanna grew. People began to treat her like something scared, but not in a good way, like a statue of a god that must not be touched. Sometimes Adanna wished she could scream, not out of anger, but just to prove that she was human too, that she felt pain, that she could bleed, that she was not a ghost in a girl's body. But no scream ever came, not even when she lost the only person who truly understands her. It was a rainy evening when Obinna collapsed at the farm. He had been helping an old woman harvest yams when his chest began to tighten. By the time they brought him to the healer's hut, his breath was shallow, his eyes dim. Adanna stayed beside him all night, holding his hand, watching the rise and fall of his heart. You have to fight, she whispered through her voice, though her voice was low and shaky. Obinna opened his eyes briefly. If I die now, at least I know one true friend in this world. That is you. She pressed his hand to her lips, fighting the storm that brewed within her. Her chest felt heavy. Her eyes burned, but still no tears. When Obinna died before sunrise, the villagers said nothing to her. They just watched, waiting to see what she would do. But Adanna simply stood up, walked out of the healer's hut, and disappeared into the forest. She stayed there all day, alone under the trees, gripping the earth with her hands as if trying to pull the pain from her chest and bury it beneath the soil. But her face remained dry. Not a single tear touched her cheek. From that day, something inside her changed. She became even whiter, colder. She spoke less, smiled less, barely ate. The only time she found peace was at the stream, watching the water carry away falling leaves, wondering if it could carry her pain too. That was when the strange dreams began. Each night, she saw a vision, a shadowy figure with white eyes standing in a field of fire. It would stretch its arms towards her and whispered in a voice she could not understand. Sometimes, the dream ended with a scream, other times with thunder, but always she woke up with her heart pounding and her hand shaking. She told no one. Who will believe her? They already feared her enough. She didn't want to add madness to the list, but the dreams didn't stop. And then the storm came. Not in dreams this time, but in the real world. It started like any other day. The sun rose gently over the hills of Umudim, casting long shadows across the red soil. Children ran through the narrow footpath with laughter in their voices. Farmers heading to their fields, and smoke curled from the roofs of huts as women prepared morning meals. But something felt different. The birds were quieter than usual. The air was thick, not just with heat, but with tension, like the village itself was holding its breath. Even Adanna felt it. She sat by the stream again, her eyes fixed on the water, but her mind far away. The dreams from the night before still haunted her. This time, the shadowy figure had come closer. He had spoken clearly. When your scream rises, the world will tremble. She shivered at the memory. What did it mean? Was she cursed or chosen? She often asked herself. She stood up slowly and walked back to the village, but as she reached the edge of Umudin, she heard the sound of drums, not the kind used in celebration. Those were drums of warning. People began to run. A boy screamed, "They are coming! The Ubuaja warriors!" Fear spread like wildfire. The Ubuaja warriors were well known across the region, merciless raiders from beyond the river. They struck without warning, taking food, burning homes, killing those who resisted. No village had ever been able to fight them off. Adanna ran towards her mother's hut, heart pounding. She found Ugochi trembling inside, trying to pack a few things in a calabash. "Mama, we have to leave now," Adanna said, her voice louder than usual. Before they could step outside, they heard shouting. The warriors had already entered the village. Smoke rose from huts as flames swallowed rooftops. People screamed, running in all directions. Men tried to fight with machetes and spears, but the Obaja warriors were too many, too strong. Adanna pulled her mother toward the back path behind the compound, but a warrior appeared from the corner, swinging his weapon. Adanna froze. The man grabbed Ugochi and shoved her to the ground. Adanna tried to fight him off, but he was too strong. He raised his hand to strike her, and then something big happened. For the first time in her life, Adanna felt something explode inside her chest. A pain so raw, so deep, so loud that it could no longer be contained. Her mouth opened and she screamed. It wasn't just a cry of fear. It was a scream of pain, of danger, of grief, of power. It was everything she had ever bottled up. All the silence of her life crashing out in one terrifying wave. The sound was unlike anything the villagers had ever heard. It tore through the air, shaking the trees. The ground trembled, birds shattered, calabashes exploded. Even the warrior holding her mother staggered back, clutching his ear, his nose bleeding. All round the village, people fell to their knees. The warriors screamed and ran. Some collapsed instantly. Some dropped their weapons and fled in confusion. Adanna's scream did not stop immediately. It echoed through the hills like a force of nature. Loud, violent, impossible to ignore. And when it finally ended, the village was silent again, except this time they were not looking at her with fear. They were staring at her in awe. Even Ugochi, her mother, weak and bleeding, stared at her daughter in shock. Adanna, she whispered, "Who are you?" But Adanna didn't answer. She sank to her knees, trembling, and for the first time in 20 years, tears poured down her face. Heavy, hot, unstoppable tears. And the wind, the same strange wind from the beginning, began to rise again, circling her gently, as if greeting an old friend. Months passed, and Umudim slowly began to rebuild. New huts were raised where ashes once lay. Farms were cleared again. Children laughed in the open field. But something in the air had changed. Not fear, relevance. Adanna had become more than a girl. She was a symbol of strength, a mystery, a protector. Some called her Nwamuma, the daughter of thunder. Others simply bowed when she passed. But Adanna never let the praise rise to her head. She still fetched water from the stream. She still helped her mother in the farm. She still worked silently through the market. Only now her silence had a different meaning. It was not the silence of fear or confusion. It was the silence of someone who understood her place in the world. Someone who had met the storm inside her and made peace with it. One evening, as the orange sun set behind the hills, Dibia Okorie called Adanna to sacred hilltop where they trained. "Your spirit is balanced now," he said, looking at her. "But your journey is not over. The world beyond Umudin still lives in darkness. There are people who will need you, not just for your power, but for your courage." Adanna looked at the horizon, where birds flew free in the sky. "But what if I don't know what to do?" she said. "You will know," the Dibia said, "because the one who holds a scream like yours does not wait for direction. She creates her own path." He handed her a small carved object, a smooth stone with ancient symbols attached to it. "Whenever you feel lost," he said, "hold this, breathe and listen. Your spirit will answer." That night, as the villagers gathered around a new fire, one built not from fear but hope, Adanna stood among them. The people sang, danced, and celebrated their survival, but they also honored her. Ugochi stood beside her proudly. She whispered, "My child, I knew you were different, but I didn't know you were born for something greater." Adanna smiled and held her mother's hand tightly. "I don't know either until I heard myself." And just as the drumming began again, a little girl from the crowd ran to her and asked shyly, "Will you ever scream again?" Adanna bent down, brushed the child's cheek gently, and replied, "Only when the world truly needs to hear it." Then she stood and walked quietly towards the screen, the place where she had once buried her pain, now a place where she embraced her power. The wind rose softly, wrapping around her like a friend, and in its quiet dance, it carried a message across the hills, through the trees, beyond the rivers. The girl who never cried had finally found her voice, and with that voice, she would change everything.